Who are the New Scots and what role do they have to play in the independence debate? Tonight we'll discuss with politicians, experts and a studio audience. Hello and welcome to the first in a series of special Newsnight Scotland debates. Tonight we'll be hearing from a multicultural cross-section of Scottish society. They'll be quizzing two leading politicians on subjects ranging from the independence referendum to Scottish identity to our future in the European Union. Those politicians are the SNP's Humza Yousaf, who's also the Scottish Government's Minister for External Affairs and International Development. And he's joined by Ruth Davidson, leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. I'm also joined by a panel with wide experience. They are Gina Netto, an expert in identity and ethnicity at Heriot-Watt University, Amar Anwar, the well-known lawyer, Jacob Oskar-Polinsky, a journalist at a Polish-language online magazine, and Colin Lee. He's the Scottish Director for the Council for Ethnic Minority Voluntary Organisations. Well, our questions come from our audience tonight, and the first is from Dr. Nassar Mir.
Many commentators claim that Scotland is more tolerant of its ethnic minorities than perhaps elsewhere in the UK. I wonder if the panel think that's a complacent attitude, and is Scotland's tolerance yet to be stress tested?
OK, well, I'd be interested to hear the thoughts of some in our audience, perhaps who've moved to Scotland from other countries. I'll come to you in a moment. First, though, to Amar Anwar.
I think there's a fallacy. I know when I first came to Scotland in 1986, I used to hear this term that we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. And over the years, I think on one view, Scotland is an all-inclusive community and welcomes people of different cultures. But the reality is that when it has been tested, there's always been a backlash. You know, we've seen racist murders, we've seen our own equivalents of Stephen Lawrence with the case of Surjit Singh Chokar. But what I found positive is the response of the wider community, the trade unions, when they fought back. But the concern I have is that when you look across society, the words institutional racism are still very much in existence. You don't see black judges, lawyers, police officers, people in senior ranking management or anything. You know, it doesn't exist. And even after the airport attack, when the Glasgow airport attack happened, we had everybody joining in unity saying, isn't it wonderful, nobody from Scotland was involved. But a few months later, we had the case of a terrorist case that went to court, in which the case of Mohammed Atif Sadiq was found guilty, subsequently released on a miscarriage of justice appeal. And we saw the backlash. Okay. And we saw ordinary people on the ground, you know, Islamophobia, attacks against asylum seekers, refugees. That is still there very much as part of the United Kingdom. Okay. But I blame the UK politicians for that, Westminster.
All right, Gina Netto?
Well, I think in many ways living in Scotland is more pleasant and conducive than living in some parts of England, for example, and I think...
have you done both, or that's from your own research?
From my own research, yes. But I'd have to say also that there is a danger of complacency, and although it might be very pleasant in some very middle-class neighbourhoods, the reality in some estates is that it is harsh. It is harsh. There is a resentment towards new arrivals, and these tend to be areas, particularly where there is areas of deprivation, but it's not by no means confined to these areas. And also we have statistics that the number of incidents of racial harassment is increasing. Last year it was 10%. There was a 10% increase in racial harassment incidents. There was over 5,000 cases of reported harassment alone, and we all know that there is significant underreporting as well as, you know, as well as reporting of racial incidents. So.
Okay. Let's bring in our audience on that. I mean, who here has moved to Scotland from another country? Who's had that experience? Okay, lady in the front row here. Good experience or not quite so good?
Very good experience. Scotland is a very welcoming country. I have enjoyed the privilege of meeting very interesting people who have given me lots of opportunities to collaborate with them. However, over the last 2 years, I think I have felt politically excluded from the current argument in the independence debate, and that's why I am here tonight, to see if we can go forward with that.
Well, thanks very much for being here. I saw another hand up on this side. Yeah, gentleman in the middle there, yeah.
Yes, I came to Scotland about 30-odd years ago and I've never looked back. I have become an integral part of the society, and I've taken the traits of the Scottish people myself without even realizing it. I do concur with the lady there who said it's a very welcoming country. It's not so much tolerant, but it's an integral part of our lives. It's welcoming rather than tolerance.
Ever had a bad experience?
I have, yes. For example, when I first moved to my hometown, it's called Alva, I had to get into fights to become initiated into the society. But that's part and parcel of the culture itself. The 20 years I've lived in my town, I have never had a single incident of racial harassment. I walk in the streets feeling as safe as the next person.
Okay, Ruth Davidson, is there a danger we could be a bit complacent on all of this if we see ourselves as a country that is super tolerant?
Well, I think we can be complacent, and I think we have to work hard at all levels to try and make sure we get past that. I'd just like to pick Amar Anwar up and blaming it all on Westminster. We would expect that from a fully paid-up member of the Yes Scotland campaign, which wasn't quite explained there. But I think if you look at the crime figures, we have seen a rise last year. It was the first rise we'd seen in Scotland for 5 years for racial crimes. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that there are some new crimes that fall into that. So it may be a case of more reporting. It may be a case of there are more crimes that you can be charged under. So we shouldn't get too upset by that. But I think what is fantastic about Scotland is the amount of work that goes on to try and bring people together. Now, for example, I think our faith communities do a huge amount of work across Scotland. Neither Hamza or I are members of the Sikh community, but we were both at the same fundraiser for a new Gurdwara for Scotland last night. And I think that you see through work that goes on in the synagogues, through work that goes on in the Gurdwaras, in the mosques, in the churches, you see an awful lot of good work that happens across Scotland. And also government, you know, should be given a pat on the back where a pat on the back is due. Amar talked about the attack at Glasgow Airport. I think one of the finest things that Alex Salmond has done since he became First Minister was make sure he got himself down to the Central Mosque almost immediately afterwards to say that Scotland stands with its BME communities. No matter where you're from, you are all Scottish and you all have a place here.
The questioner mentioned stress testing, that you felt perhaps that Scotland's tolerance hadn't been stress tested. What did you mean by that?
Question was up there.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Well, the rhetoric is great, and I think that Scotland's political leaders have been a model of inclusion, and that's something to be recognised and celebrated. But the policies haven't really been there, and when minorities in Scotland have asked for things, well, they haven't asked for much. In England, they've asked for such things as faith schools or for other things which may or may not be contentious. In Scotland, that kind of claim, shall we say, well, it hasn't really been received or kind of conferred as yet.
Hamza Youssef.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with a number of comments that I made here on the panel. You can never be complacent. We've had some very difficult times. Willie McKinney recently. You can argue about the racial element in that. Chris Donald, Imran Khan. We've had some real difficult times, of course. I think like every member here of the minority ethnic community at one time or another faced some kind of racial incident or not. But I think in Scotland, generally, be it because it is a numbers game, it may well be, for one reason or another, actually up here there seems to be from the minority ethnic community, yes, it's a bit more welcoming, it's a bit more open. Look, we don't have this idea, whereas I think from a lot of friends that I have, I wouldn't blame Westminster politicians as such, but my friends that I have south of the border say actually in some parts of England it can be a lot more difficult because the rhetoric is, look, choose one identity over the other. Where in Scotland, actually, we say, look, you're Scottish, you don't like the weather, you complain about it, you support the crap football team. I didn't say that, they're a great football team, etc., etc. That's enough to make you Scottish. Whereas sometimes I speak to friends south of the border, and they're asked, look, are you Bangladeshi or are you British? Are you English or are you Muslim? Which one are you? You have to choose. And that's not helped by the Westminster debate, which actually, where our politicians have to take responsibility, is, look, it's an easy hit if you want to attack multiculturalism, a really easy hit because your poll numbers will go flying up. But actually we have to be tempered in our debate. And I think in Scotland, across the chamber, we've been quite good at that.
So anybody can be Scottish?
Look, if you feel Scottish, I'm not going to tell you you're not Scottish, absolutely. You
okay,
Scottish.
Lady in the middle, yep.
Yes, I was just going to say that now with the greater debate increasing about the future of Scotland in a referendum for independence, well, I feel that ethnic minorities should then take the opportunity of really becoming more involved with politics. It's a wonderful opportunity for them, and I really think I'm the daughter of a Polish immigrant during the last war, and certainly very, very welcome they all were at that time. And I'm glad to say that today, most people that I've spoken to who have come into Scotland have been very well welcomed. So that's it.
I want to bring in another slightly different perspective on all of this. Maria, we spoke briefly with earlier, but you had a follow-up question, Maria Conti.
Yeah, my question is about cultural identity, and here it goes to the panel. There are many different identities that make the people of Scotland. Does the panel think that each side of the referendum campaign properly recognises those identities, and are they successfully engaging with ethnic minority communities?
Okay, well, let's develop that with Colin Lee.
Well, actually, interesting enough, we've done a piece of research on identity and how Scottish people, actually ethnic minority people, relate to engagement in political and democratic processes. And to be honest, a lot of people within BME communities are very disengaged with politics and democracy generally, because what they see is very much not part of being the democratic processes in society in terms of how they relate to politics, in terms of role model. There's no politicians there. There is now with Hamza and Hanzala, but very much not representative of diverse communities. So I think it isn't just about the campaign itself, it's about politics and democracy generally, which I think has to be a bit more engaging in the parties in terms of how they engage with not only young people but BME communities generally.
Jacob, do people reach out to those from Poland, from Eastern Europe, as well as the black and minority ethnic communities that were touched on in Colin's contribution?
Right, well, sort of, yes, especially before the elections or before a referendum, just like now. As a website, we do get some calls from the politicians asking us about running a story on, say, independence, on the yes campaign or no campaign. The same went just before the elections in Scotland and in the UK. But on the daily basis, we get hardly any contact with the politicians.
But you have had contact at this fairly early stage in the long campaign to the referendum from both Better Together and Yes Scotland?
Yes, yeah, we did. We had both parties calling us up for, I don't know, maybe last couple of months. But normally it stops when he asks about the debate, right? We can run a story, but we as a website, we're neutral, so we're quite happy to put both things forward. But when you ask about debate between two sides, that's when the line goes dead.
Okay, a lady in the front row here, yep.
Thank you, Glenn. Yes, Scotland is indeed engaging with the minority ethnic communities, and they're an integral part of the tapestry that makes up Scotland.
You're involved in that campaign?
I am indeed, and for us, and one of the concerns of many of the minority ethnic communities in Scotland is the legislation that's coming out of Westminster, particularly in relation to immigration. I mean, in 2012 alone, there were 9 changes in the immigration rules, where applicants have found themselves submitting applications in terms of one category to find out when the category's heard that the rules have then changed.
Well, I happen to know we're going to be talking about immigration, but I just want to stick to what the campaigns are doing. Ruth Davison, you're involved in the Better Together campaign.
Well, Better Together campaign is separate from the political parties, so they phoned me up and asked me to appear as a representative of it, but I'm not involved in the day-to-day working. But I know that they are reaching out to communities right across Scotland, not just BME communities, but also the Polish community, other white British communities that live in Scotland. I don't think we should forget that as an area of society, and also other minority communities as well. For example, I've been involved in LGBT work for them too. So I know that in terms of the debate going forward, and it's going to be a long debate. It's going to last well over a year and a half. We're trying to engage. Not this programme, though. No, not this programme. We're going to try and engage with as many people as we possibly can.
Okay, and what would your key message on the yes side be, Hamza, and then on the other side, Ruth?
Well, look, I mean, I think, you know, there's always more that you can do as a campaign and political parties in terms of reaching out to all segments of society. So yes,
key message.
The yes campaign, but the key message would be, look, we're absolutely open to engaging. We want to engage. We want to hear people's diverse views, and we certainly won't shy away. But look, it would be a very terrible mistake to assume that ethnic minority communities have vastly different interests to the rest of the society. I mean, economy, what it will mean for their family, etc., as well as probably specific issues in terms of minorities. But it's important to realise, look, ethnic minorities have made a huge contribution to Scotland through their businesses and education, etc. In fact, they punch above their weight here in Scotland. And it's important that those views are
I want to just ask Ruth the same point. What would the key message be from...
Well, I agree with Hamza that in terms of what people from BME communities want is not vastly different from people across Scotland. But I think, being part of the UK and being part of a larger bloc, sitting at the top table in terms of Europe, in terms of NATO, in terms of the UN, it's about being world citizens. It's about lifting your horizons beyond the border with England, and it's about looking at the whole world. And I think being part of the larger UK and all that entails is of benefit to the people of Scotland, no matter where they were born or when they've come here.
Thanks very much indeed for that. I'm going to move on to another question now, and it comes from Sarah Milne. Sarah.
My question is about immigration. Under an independent Scotland, should we have a more open or a more restrictive immigration policy?
OK, I'll leave our politicians for a little bit. Again, I'm interested to hear what our audience think on that, but let's put that first of all to you, Gina.
Well, my view on that is not so much on the extent of immigration there is, but actually on how ethnic minorities within the country are treated. And I think that has been my main area of interest of all these years. And I think there's significant problems and issues that remain to be addressed in terms of how ethnic minorities who've been born in this country, raised in this country, and who live in Scottish society continue to struggle with, as well as enjoying the many pleasures of being in Scotland. And that has been my main focus of interest. So my concern really is in terms of looking really, and in that sense, whether or not Scotland becomes independent or not, I think there are significant issues that the current Scottish government can address, because it's got significant powers with it, that are reserved, that have been devolved to Scotland. So I would like to see...
But not specifically on immigration.
Not specifically on immigration, but there's a whole range of... I suppose my argument would be that let's look at what Scotland is doing with this ethnic minority population now. Let's look at the strides that they're making in terms of progress in dealing with ethnic minorities who are in the country.
OK. Jacob, a lot of people have moved to Scotland from Eastern Europe in recent years, and today the UK government's looking at ways in which it can continue with restrictions on those coming from Romania and Bulgaria, for instance. Do you see that as a sensible measure?
I mean, it all depends, right? We had heard some estimates about how many Poles will come to the UK. Obviously, they're way off. Right now, there's a little bit of scaremongering going on, especially in Westminster, saying that there will be 500,000 of new immigrants coming to the UK, whilst I've read an article in Guardian highlighting the fact that many Romanians will stay, say, in Italy, in Germany, where they already got relatives. So it's not as big issue as it was with the Polish community, I think.
OK, let me bring in the lady in the front row here.
Hi. I would first of all like to request you to separate the EU and the non-EU immigration, because the two are very different issues. I'm an immigrant on the points-based system from India, and I would like to ask a question. Will an independent Scottish government honour the commitments of the UK government for immigrants like me?
OK, I'll let Hamza pick up on that when he makes his contribution, but I don't want to give the politicians all the say. Gentleman here.
Yeah, what are the nationality options likely to be in the post-independent Scotland?
Lots of questions. They're directed, I suppose, at you, Hamza, in the sense that you're proposing independence, but that doesn't necessarily mean if people voted for independence that they would vote for the SNPs around the country. But picking up on those points,
yeah,
please.
I'll pick up on a few of the points, and also actually some of the points that were made by Gina. The original question was, about an immigration system in an independent Scotland, and will it be more open and inclusive? The point of having control over immigration in an independent Scotland is that we'll be able to make that system of immigration conducive to the needs and to the interest of Scotland, socially and economically.
And does that mean it would be a more open... Does that mean, Hamza, there would be does that mean it would be more open or more restrictive?
Oh, well, look, as I'm saying, it would be to do with the needs of Scotland. So if the needs for Scotland, economically and socially, are, look, we need more skilled migrants. So, for example, University Scotland, the Institute of Directors, the STUC are saying we need more skilled migration. We have a demographic gap. Well, that is the basis by which Scotland should have an immigration system. Immigration at the moment has become a completely dirty word in the UK. And people forget that immigration is a two-way thing. Look, for as many migrants that we have coming in, we have Scottish pensioners in the Costa del Sol in Spain. You know, this point is that immigration and immigration go hand in hand. And at the moment, immigration is not decided what is in the best interest of the UK or what is in the best interest of Scotland. The UK government, successive UK governments, have made immigration policy nothing either than what the right-wing press is saying, or indeed how you cut the lead of UKIP.
OK, I'm mindful you've still got other questions to pick up on, but I want to bring in Ruth Davidson at that point.
I think that's maybe a little bit disingenuous, particularly if you think about the last UK government, which went from 36,000 non-EU migrants in 1996 to 250,000 in 2004, which was the peak. I mean, I don't think that's, you know, migrant bashing for the right-wing press.
It's an ideological drive to cut down numbers.
First of all, what we have to say is one, we have to acknowledge how much Scotland has benefited from the amount of immigration that we've had here. In terms of all of the immigrant groups that we have in Scotland, the way they're classified in the various studies that happen, every single one is at least as likely or more likely to have a degree. There's a higher proportion of people in management and director jobs, percentage-wise, than white British living in Scotland. And I think, particularly if you look at Colin's point, yes, there was. I remember the scare stories when there was EU enlargement and this number of Polish people that people said were going to come to the UK, to Scotland. And I have to say, I think it has been nothing but positive. And I think the majority of Scots would say that the Polish contribution, Poles are now the largest minority ethnic group in Scotland at 67,000.
When it comes to Romanians and Bulgarians,
sure,
do you, like number 10, want to look at ways of potentially continuing with restrictions, or would you say, from Scotland's point of view, that actually we could do with some more?
The restrictions were brought in 2005 under the last Labour government, and they expire at the end of this year, so in about 11 months' time. I think there is a move when I say that, you know, under the last government there was more than 2 million people net migrants to the UK. That's a third of the population of Scotland. The current UK government thinks that those numbers should come down a bit. To be honest, I think there is less of an issue in Scotland than it is in the rest of the UK, because the numbers and the percentage of people who come to the UK who settle in Scotland is much smaller.
So why not control powers here in Scotland if it's less of an issue, so we can have, you know, a little bit of flexibility in the system to suit our needs?
Well, because one, I don't particularly want border posts across the border.
Why would you need? I mean, that's ridiculous.
What you would be wanting to do.
Scaremongering that you could possibly try. I mean, that was tried. That was tried by Lord John Reid back in, you know, early 2000s. It didn't work then, and it won't work.
I want to bring in some of our other contributors. Amber, you were desperate to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I was... When Ruth talks there about, you know, we have to welcome the contribution of ethnic minorities and our immigrants, it always reminds me when people say some of my best friends are black, because the successive UK governments have pandered to racism, to the far right, by continually raising the race card, by playing the immigrants card, where either, you know, first of all it was the Jews, then it was the Irish, then it was the Asians, then it was Africans, then it was asylum seekers, now it's Romanians and Eastern Europeans. And by successively doing so, they keep reiterating that immigration is somehow a problem. In Scotland, you know, and in the UK, more people are leaving this country every year than tend to be coming in. And people who have come into this country for the last 10, 20, 100 years have made massive contributions. So why not celebrate that?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I just said.
Government legislation.
That's exactly what I just said,
to the far right.
Okay. I want to bring in people in our audience. There's lots of hands up. Yeah, lady there.
In which case, after listening to what the panels have said, in which case I think after we've made a choice at the independence referendum's time, we will be in a position where all the parties seem to agree that Scotland should be treated slightly differently with regards to population and whether we have or don't accept immigrants in this country. And I think we're looking at a situation where, independence referendum or not, we have to think as a nation, do we want to have? Are we able to contain many more immigrants here? And how are they going to continue contributing to this country? How can we be different from Westminster? Westminster's got a so-called population numbers problem down there. We don't have the same problem up here. We could maybe afford to have a few more bodies up here. But is that the point? Or is it, how do we as migrants contribute to this country, economically speaking, culturally, and in every way?
Okay, I want to bring in a supplementary question. We've talked a lot about immigration. I wanted to touch briefly on asylum before we move on. And Charles Atangana has the question on that. Charles.
Should the Westminster government offer an amnesty to all the asylum seekers living in this country? And will the SNP government itself commit itself to such a program if Scotland became independent tomorrow?
Okay, so that is one for the politicians, the idea of an amnesty for those claiming asylum in the country. Hamza Youssef?
Yes, I mean, for me, actually, the issue is not about an amnesty. For me, the issue in terms
so you're
of
not in
independence,
favour of an amnesty?
No, I'm not, we've never talked about doing, you know, blanket amnesty, and you know, it does actually get my goat that the fact that UKBA keeps finding a backlog of tens of thousands. Yeah, the Borders Agency, tens of thousands of a backlog. But look, the thing about asylum,
be the way to clear that?
No, actually, look, what you have to do in terms of asylum. And you know, I'm pleased actually the BBC is recognising immigration is very different to asylum, because people sometimes conflate the two. But when it comes to asylum, what you have to do is realise this, that we have an inhumane system currently in the United Kingdom government and successive United Kingdom governments. We treat our animals, frankly, better than we treat some asylum seekers. You're talking about destitution in some respects. You know, we see it here in this city, in Glasgow, destitution of asylum seekers. Not only do we see destitution, but we also see, you know, dawn raids still happening. Children still being detained and taken south of the border to be detained.
Okay, so you're looking at a different policy, but you said no to an amnesty.
What you're looking
Hamza,
at,
I'm
what
short
you're
of
looking
time.
at is a more
I need to bring in
system,
Ruth Davidson.
And with independence, we can
Hamza.
shape that system that's more humane.
I need to bring in Ruth.
Yeah, but you won't tell us what that system would be. I think
2013.
All right, of course, everything's in the white paper. But I think what's important is I don't believe in a blanket amnesty either words. I just want to correct Hamza. It's not tens of thousands in Scotland. There's about 2,500 registered asylum seekers in Scotland at the moment. I think that we inherited a very bad system down south in terms of the coalition
Tens
government.
of thousands is a UKBA backlog. That's
I think it's important that we recognise that what people want is a fair system, a transparent system, and one that's quick, so that there's not that level of uncertainty. They're trying to make progress on each of these fronts. It's slow going, but they're trying to make progress. And when you look at achievements that have happened, for example, Dungavel being shut, so there are no children being detained overnight in Scotland.
We shipped them down south. That's a humane policy.
You
just transfer them to England, so that's a humane policy. Take children from Scotland. That's just a disgrace. I mean, you don't have it in Scotland, but you know, we're better together because we can shut them down south. Well, frankly, disgraceful.
In terms of the debate that we're having, I actually don't think there's too much clear blue water between you and I. Neither of us believe in a blanket amnesty. We both believe
do you believe in child detention?
But we both believe in which there's
elements
at which people should. Some people
just answer the question. Do you believe in child detention?
I do the questions. The audience has the questions. And the question wasn't about child detention. I'm going to move on to another question because we haven't got a lot of time to get through a lot of different topics tonight. Mendogas Zalekas, where are you?
Yeah.
On the front. Go ahead.
So we've had much in recent weeks about the UK's and Scotland's future relationship with the European Union. What is your vision of the European Union?
What's your vision of the European Union? Do you have a particular view of how Scotland, either within or out with the UK, should relate with the European Union?
Yeah, let me be more specific. What is Scotland's, what would be independent Scotland's situation in European Union, whether Scotland will remain in EU, and to be more specific, East European community is very much worried if their status changes in case Scotland becomes independent.
Okay. Hamza Youssef.
Yes, well, I would say to the gentleman in the front, actually, your biggest worry, and I think when you look at the Polish community, we were talking to Jacob before the show, anywhere between 70 to 100,000 members of the Polish community living here in Scotland. I don't want to see their status change. There's undoubtedly that Scotland will continue its EU membership. You know, we've had
undoubtedly,
absolutely. Oh no, I mean, okay, you can talk about the
Czech foreign minister, the head of the
this is ridiculous. I mean, yeah. So
the Irish foreign minister all say that you would have to reapply.
No, the point is nobody says that Scotland, not for a day, would we be outside of the European Union? In fact, if you can point to the convention or the directive where we would be outside of the European Union.
From José Manuel Barroso. I can point to the exact quote from the Irish Foreign Minister, and I can quote to the exact quote from the Czech Foreign Minister, all of which say you would have to reapply to join and you would get a worse deal and it would be a long
we would continue membership
process. No, that you would have to apply to join.
Can I ask you just to clarify?
Hold on, let me answer the gentleman.
Can I just ask you, do you accept that with independence the Scottish Government would have to submit a fresh application as a new state?
No, it's about continued membership, Glenn.
So there would be no application, or the application would take place?
If you're not going to be out with the EU for a single day, why on earth are you going
to have to apply or not?
No, it's about continued membership, is what we're discussing.
The three foreign ministers that have been mentioned and the head of the European Commission say they're not saying you wouldn't be welcome. They're saying that you'd have to apply, and it might take some time.
We talk about we are very clear in our position that is, and indeed, others have made this point, that it would be negotiated terms. Of course, we accept that.
With the European
negotiated terms, but there's no doubt at all that Scotland would be in the EU and continue to be in the EU. Let me address the gentleman's point, because it's a very important one about different status. When it comes to Eastern Europeans or the Polish community, for example, okay, so Scotland, we know, is going to not be a day outside of the European Union. Nobody, even our opponents, have stopped.
Where's your legal advice for that? Or you don't have any, but you lied about it anyway?
The point is that, look, your uncertainty doesn't exist with an independent Scotland. The uncertainty exists with a UK government that wants to rip the United Kingdom outside of the European Union. Yeah, we want to keep you in the European Union. In fact, now it's come to a complete 180, where we have a situation that if you want Scotland in the European Union, you're better voting yes in the referendum than leaving it to a UK government that just is doing whatever UKIP wants it to do.
Let Ruth take up that point and answer the original question.
Well, to take up the point, first of all, we've got a Scottish Government that said that it had legal advice saying that it would continue, and then we found out it didn't, despite spending thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money trying to hide it up in the court system. You've got the foreign ministers of the Czech Republic, of Ireland, you've got the head of the European Commission, all saying that you would have to...
Scaremongering, sure, we won't be in the EU. The sky will fall down, the earth will swallow us up.
José Manuel Barroso is scaremongering. Well done, Humza. I think people don't believe that. But I think coming on to his point about the UK government position, David Cameron made it absolutely clear, not only in his speech, but also when he was questioned at Prime Minister's questions just a few hours after under intense questioning, that he would campaign to stay in a reformed European Union. He wants a better deal for the people, not just of the rest of the UK, but of Scotland too.
Just on this point about what would happen if Scotland became independent, we've had various contributions, but what the European Commission has said is that it would be prepared to set out in detail what would happen if the UK government would ask the question. Do you support the Scottish government in asking the UK to seek that advice so that we can know the position and the questioner can know what his status would be?
Well, I was under the impression, because the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, stood up in the Parliament and said that she was not just seeking a meeting with José Manuel Barroso, but she was getting a meeting with José Manuel Barroso.
But you've got a hotline to number 10. Couldn't you get the Prime Minister to sort this one out?
And then suddenly, not only that, but his deputy has to turn back and say, we're not even meeting with the Scottish Government. They have peddled untruths, misinformation, bullying on this right from the start.
This is an
important point.
The question is whether you could get the UK government to do us all a favour and get the clarity that we need for the purposes of this debate.
We don't want to know the answer.
We have the clarity. We've got We've got the head of the European Commission saying they would have to reapply. How much more clear do you need it? You've got the member states saying that an independent Scotland
the head of the European Commission has said he would set out in detail exactly the process if only the UK government would ask.
He has said, and I will quote you exactly what he said, if one part of a country, I'm not now referring to any specific one, wants to become an independent state, of course, as an independent state, it has to apply to the European membership according to the rules. This is obvious.
Yes, he's promising more detail if only the UK government will ask. Okay, I want to bring in members of the audience on this, people who haven't spoken so far. Yeah, gentleman in the middle here, yes.
I'm not wondering about Scotland will stay in European Union, because after a few days, Mr. Cameron's speech, I'm wondering England will stay in UK, in EU. Scotland will stay, it looks like, because the politicians won't stay on the EU. But Mr. Cameron said something different. I'm starting wondering about the English people want to be part of the EU.
He's, of course, promising a referendum for all of the UK. Gentleman here.
I think the argument on the European referendum in Westminster and obviously with the independence referendum in Scotland is a real worry, not just for Scotland and England, but actually for the young people of the UK and within Scotland. I would like to know from both campaigns what type of future will young people have within Scotland as either an independent country or within the United Kingdom. Because the work that I've done with young people, there's a clear contrast between the policies that Scotland has for young people, particularly around unemployment.
And do you think the EU dimension matters in that, whether we continue?
Absolutely. I think the EU dimension is extremely important. The European Union
we need to be in or out or have a reformed relationship?
Initiatives like Youth on the Move, the Erasmus schemes are extremely important for Scotland's unemployed young people, but also UK's unemployed people, but also those within colleges and universities. And I see that an in-out referendum from Westminster or a threat of that could be a danger for the young people within Scotland.
Okay, I haven't heard from our panellists on this side for a wee while. On the European question, Jacob.
Right, on whether we should stay or not, right?
Well, the original question was about a vision for...
Yeah, well, there are many different visions, right? We heard the option for Scotland to stay in the EU. Obviously, Mr Barroso made a point about us reapplying. There's Norway saying stay clear out of the EU. We're handling things on our own very well. And
they still pay contributions. They just don't get the say at the meetings.
Yes, but they've made a point, right? So there's another option. There are some politicians who say, well, that's a maybe. But from what we hear, especially from the SNP, all the parties want to keep Scotland in the European Union. Whilst we've got Mr Cameron, who gave the Yes campaign a huge gift, saying, listen, let's just vote, maybe we should get out. And there's quite a few people who are actually voting, well, we should opt out from the European Union as the United Kingdom. Now, that will influence Scotland heavily, and many of the people, at least who I spoke with, the business people, they want to stay in the European Union. That gives their breadline, right? So, yes, I think, well, from what we can see, Scotland is clearly staying within the European Union, but they will have to we will have to negotiate our way in, or our stay in the European Union.
Okay. Can I just say, it really concerns me when you have Cameron talking about renegotiating, staying in but renegotiating, because two points stand out for me. One is repatriation of workers' rights, which means basically undercutting wages, bringing back laws,
but he wants to stay in.
And that's him staying in, but that means attacking those workers' rights and taking us out of the benefits of the European Union. And secondly is the European Human Rights Act, which the scaremongering that has gone on by focusing on one or two individuals to attack a whole series of legislation that has actually protected asylum seekers, refugees, has protected workers' rights within this country, has protected women's rights, gender equality. He wants to just basically do away with all that. And I, quite frankly, would rather be in an independent Scotland that wants to stay in Europe rather than take a chance with an English government that's doing everything hell-bent in order to scaremonger us to leave Europe.
Okay. Lady in the front row, yeah.
You would have to reapply to the European Union, so which means you might be asked to keep the euro as the currency. What is your strategy on getting out of accepting the euro?
It's about... do you want me to answer that question straight away?
I'll leave that as a point, because we're into our last few minutes, so I want to take in a final question, if I can. There's your answer, okay. The last one is on the economy, and it comes from Indy Bryceland. Indy.
Scotland enjoyed many benefits by being with the UK, especially during the recent years of economic downturn. Do we risk losing jobs and welfare benefits if we leave UK?
Do we risk losing jobs and welfare benefits? Again, I'd be interested to hear from the audience on that, but I'll come to you first of all, Nita.
Well, I'd like to say that I think the situation in Scotland concerning the employment of ethnic minorities is very concerning. Ruth pointed out to the statistics relating to those in managerial and professional positions, but she has actually omitted the significant number of people who significantly high unemployment rates of ethnic minorities in this country, and as well as issues around underemployment. So people doing jobs that they're not actually, for which they are more than, not commensurate with their qualifications. that is an issue of great concern in terms of what is currently happening in the UK, and also in terms of representation, again, of ethnic minorities in public bodies, which should be actually showing the way. We should be showing the example in terms of employing ethnic minorities, not predominantly at the lowest levels of organizations where they tend to be disproportionately represented, but at all organizational hierarchies. That's what we would like to see any government in power doing much more of, taking a proactive stance on these issues and not wallowing in complacency.
Colin Lee.
I share a lot of Gina's point, because I think in Scotland, I think a lot could still be done on employing ethnicity within public bodies, within senior management generally. I think, you know, when it comes to the economy, we don't have a crystal ball as to whether we're independent, whether, you know, Scotland will be thriving or not. And I think that's up to the yes and no campaigns to actually enlighten us on that. One thing I don't get a clear picture, we get a lot of policies from the SNP government and current government on what they would do in terms of independence. I think one point that's probably missed from a lot of the parties in the no campaign is, if Scotland was to be independent, what are their policies as government? You know, I think that's what we would like to hear, not very much negative about, you know, no full stop. But I think they've got to engage the fact that if independence is to come, what are the policies on immigration, foreign policy, etc.? Because I think that's something we would really like to hear, because, you know, if you're in government, SNP government is not going to be there forever. So if we're independent nation, are you going to take the lead from Westminster, or are you going to be independent in your own party?
Well, I'll let them weave that into their answers when we get to them. Let's just bring in some more voices from the audience. Lady there, yes.
The Refugee Council have provided the basis for discussion, whatever happens in the referendum, concerning how asylum and refugee issues should be dealt with. Have the people who are in political parties seen this already? It's a
Okay, and is there an economic point on that?
The economic point is just that our people who are new into this country have no ability to work. They're not allowed to work. They're here.
You believe that they should be?
They should certainly be able to fit into our society in a better way than it happens at the moment.
Okay, gentleman over here, yes, you.
Yeah, regarding the economics, already the ethnic minority, they are already suffering underrepresentation, especially in jobs. And if there's going to be a sort of an independent Scotland, the government has to prove to us that it's going to be better with them. Because now what we are experiencing at the moment is as part of the United Kingdom. And we talk about asylum, we talk about refugees, but we've not even mentioned about people that have got their document hanging with the Home Office. Late last year, the UK Border Agency said they have about 250 to 300,000 backlog. Now, the government was talking about cuts in spending, but they were not actually looking at people that are being put under pressure, families and individuals. So as things are now, at the moment, the ethnic minority is suffering, and the government has to let us know whether it's going to be better on the other side,
okay,
or we should continue with the devil on this side.
Well, I suppose that applies to both sides, you know, that if you're for independence, you need to say, well, how you would be better off with independence, but equally, if you're for Scotland remaining in the UK, why would that necessarily be better, Ruth Davis?
Well, I think if you look at some of the positive economic steps that the UK government are making, for example, reducing corporation tax down to 22%, they're going to try and make it down to 20% if they can to encourage business. We've seen a drop in unemployment. It's now 7.8% UK-wide, which is lower than it was before the crash. Today, this week actually, we've seen billions put on share prices because businesses are recovering. In fact, today the FTSE 100 went through the 6,300 mark for the first time since May 2008 before the crash.
If you were in charge just in Scotland, couldn't you make a better fist of it?
Well, I think you've got to look at what you get through the strength of numbers and size. And you know, Hamza will shout at me for scaremongering for this, no doubt, because the SNP always do. But if you look at something like when you have shocks to your system, like when you have two large financial institutions failing, being part of that larger unit means that you can support those shocks to the system and that you can keep going. And in terms of one of the points that Chandeep made about opportunities for young people growing up, I think we should also acknowledge where devolution is in this debate, because education has already devolved to Scotland, so we're making Scotland only decisions about that. But for example, things like having a Commonwealth visa so you can work abroad in Australia or New Zealand is something that you get for being part of the UK government, and that's something that an awful lot of young people benefit from too.
I guess Independent Scotland might have access to that as a Commonwealth
Well,
country.
we don't know because they've not told us.
Hamza Youssef?
Well, the original question about the economic situation. I mean, I tried to think about this and put the shoe on the other foot and reverse it. If Scotland was an independent country and we were having a referendum to join with the rest of the United Kingdom, you know, would you really want to join a union that is about to hit probably a triple-dip recession? Would you look to join a union that would spend £100 billion on nuclear Trident missiles instead of on things like welfare? Would you really, you know, are we in a good place when our welfare system is being decimated to the point that you're cutting the tax of the highest and the richest in order to cut away from the disabled and for those who are suffering on
the question pointed out is that if you want people to vote for independence, it can't just be about them not being happy with what they've got now. You have to persuade them
absolutely accept that.
There is something better around the corner. So how do you do that?
Absolutely. Well, you don't spend £100 billion on nuclear Trident weapons, which is one way to go. But my point is, you know, it's a very good point, Glenn, because I'm not here to say, yeah, independence comes tomorrow and we'll all be holding hands and singing Kumbaya, the sun will shine forever, you know, we'll get rid of all our problems. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Would we be better or worse off after year one? We'll have challenges. I don't have a crystal ball, is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's always better. So you won't be able to give that kind of guarantee? In good times or in bad times, it's always better to have the power in your own hands. So you can make the decisions in the interest of your people and of your nation, and I think that's what independence brings.
But let's not.
The
UK is my nation.
Let's not say. Let's not say things are going to be. You know, this is going to happen. Both sides of the debate can get carried away in the extremes. The truth is, yes, you'll have challenging times, but let's have the power in our own hand, so that institutions like the welfare system, like the NHS, like free education,
you don't want nurses and Dumfries to have the same pay as nurses in Carlisle
by a UK government who just cares, you know, not a jot about Scotland.
You don't want housing benefit to be the same on both sides of the border. You don't want people in communities that are only 2 miles apart to have differentiation.
All right, and that is in essence some of the argument that you're going to hear a lot of over the course of the coming months running up to the referendum in 2014. Our time is over for tonight, although this is the first in a series of Newsnight Scotland debates. Thank you to everyone on our panel and to everyone in our audience for your questions and comments and contributions. Newsnight Scotland is back at the usual time on BBC Two Scotland tomorrow night. Good night.